Ladies and gentlemen, hear this with clarity and courage. God will shake whatever you lean on when it starts replacing your reliance on Him, not because He's angry, not because He's cruel, but because He's faithful. And faithfulness sometimes feels like disruption before it feels like deliverance. There comes a moment in every believer's life when God looks at what you're trusting and asks, "Is this helping you trust me, or is this helping you avoid me?" Because dependence is powerful. Whatever you depend on shapes how you think, how you decide, how you pray, and how you obey. And when dependence drifts from God to something He created, God steps in, not to punish you, but to rescue you. Some of you leaned on success. It worked for a while. It gave you confidence, affirmation, applause. But success is a poor substitute for identity, so God shook it, not to humiliate you, but to humble you back into sonship, back into knowing you are loved before you ever achieve another thing. Some of you leaned on people. You trusted their presence, their consistency, their promises, and God allowed distance, disappointment, even betrayal, not because love is wrong, but because people are limited. They can walk with you, but they cannot carry you. And when God shakes people out of your life, it's often because they were holding a weight they were never built to bear. Some of you leaned on money. You didn't worship it, you just trusted it. It made you feel safe. It made you feel prepared, and God said, "I am your source, not your savings." So He disrupted the flow, not to make you afraid, but to remind you that manna doesn't come from storage, it comes from heaven. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Whatever you lean on quietly becomes Lord, and God refuses to share His glory with substitutes. He won't let a relationship, a routine, a title, or a talent take His place. Because idols don't always look like statues. Sometimes they look like stability. And God is so serious about your freedom that He will destabilize what keeps you bound. He will touch the thing you thought was untouchable. He will interrupt what you thought was secure. He will allow the cracks to show, because cracks reveal foundations. And if the foundation isn't Him, it won't survive the weight of your calling. This is why the shaking hurts. Because God is not just removing things from your hands. He's removing them from your heart. He's rewiring your trust. He's teaching you how to stand without props, how to walk without crutches, how to believe without guarantees. And don't miss this. The shaking doesn't mean you failed. It means you grew. What used to support, you can't support who you're becoming. God is not dismantling your life. He's upgrading your dependence. So instead of asking, "God, why did you let this fall apart?" maybe the better question is, "God, what were you protecting me from?" Because if it could be shaken, it was never meant to sustain your future. And if God shook it, it's because He intends to hold you Himself. Let the shaking finish. Let your trust come home. Let God be God again. Not just Savior, but source. Not just helper, but foundation. Because when God is all you have, you finally discover He's all you ever needed. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand this truth deeply. The shaking is not a sign that God is against you. It is evidence that He is calling you higher. God does not disturb what He plans to abandon. He only shakes what He intends to elevate. If your life is being disrupted, it's because your destiny is demanding a different altitude. See, stability can be deceptive. You can be standing still and call it peace. You can be comfortable and call it blessing. But God knows the difference between rest and stagnation. And when comfort becomes confinement, God introduces shaking, not to hurt you, but to move you. You thought the shaking meant something was wrong. Heaven says the shaking means something is waking up. Gold is not shaken because it's useless. It's shaken because it's valuable. Buildings aren't tested because they're irrelevant. They're tested because people plan to live inside them. And God does not allow pressure on empty potential. The intensity of the shaking reveals the weight of what He's placed inside you. What you're experiencing now would have crushed the version of you from 5 years ago. The fact that you're still standing, confused maybe, tired maybe, but still standing, means God has already strengthened you beyond what you recognize. The shaking is not exposing your weakness, it's proving your growth. God shakes you when where you are can no longer contain where you're going. He disrupts familiar systems because familiar systems can't sustain future assignments. If he left everything the same, you'd never move. So he interrupts routines, he challenges assumptions, he dismantles expectations, not to destroy your life, but to stretch your faith. Elevation always requires separation. Before God takes you higher, he loosens your grip on what's below. Old mindsets can't survive new mantles. Old circles can't steward new vision. Old fears can't coexist with new authority. So God shakes until what doesn't belong falls away on its own. And here's the part most people miss. The shaking isn't random, it's directional. God knows exactly what he's doing. He knows which supports to remove and which ones to leave. He knows how much pressure to apply without breaking you. He's not reckless with your life. He's precise. You think God is slowing you down, but he's actually repositioning you. You think he's closing doors, but he's narrowing your focus. You think he's delaying you, but he's deepening you. Because the higher you go, the stronger your foundation has to be. High places demand integrity. High callings require clarity. High levels expose motives. So God shakes first. So pride doesn't survive the promotion. So fear doesn't sabotage the future. So ego doesn't poison the assignment. If God promoted you without shaking you, the weight of where you're going would crush who you are. So he prepares you in motion. He matures you in uncertainty. He strengthens you in instability. This is why you can't quit now. This is why retreat feels wrong even though forward feels hard. This is why going back no longer fits, but moving ahead feels unfamiliar. You are between versions of yourself, and the shaking is the sound of transformation. So don't interpret turbulence as failure. Don't confuse resistance with rejection. Don't mistake pressure for punishment. This is the labor room of becoming. Stay open, stay humble, stay obedient. Let God finish elevating you. Because when the shaking stops, you won't just be in a new place. You'll be a new person, standing on higher ground with a deeper faith and a clearer understanding that everything God allows is working together to lift you into what he promised. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say this plainly and without apology. What can be shaken was never designed to carry the full weight of your life. Anything temporary will eventually tremble. Anything created will eventually fail. Anything human will eventually reach its limit, and God, in his wisdom, refuses to let you discover that truth too late. We live in a world that teaches us to secure ourselves with things we can see, touch, and measure. Titles, systems, relationships, platforms, plans, and for a season, those things work. They support us just enough to make us believe they're permanent. But God knows the expiration date on everything that isn't him. So before collapse becomes catastrophe, he introduces shaking. The shaking is not meant to scare you. It's meant to sober you. It's God pulling back the curtain and saying, this was never meant to be your foundation. Foundations are invisible, but they're revealed when pressure shows up. When storms come, when life hits hard, when loss arrives unannounced, whatever remains is what you are truly standing on. Some of you are grieving things that were never meant to last. You're trying to rebuild structures God intentionally dismantled. But hear this, if it fell apart under pressure, it would have failed you under purpose. God removed it because where you're going requires something stronger. Temporary things make promises they cannot keep. They say, I'll be here forever. They say, lean on me. They say, trust me. But time exposes every lie, And God loves you too much to let you bet your future on something that cannot endure. This is why Scripture says that only what is unshakable remains. God is not interested in patching unstable systems. He's interested in giving you a kingdom, a way of living that doesn't crumble when money changes, when people leave, when health fluctuates, or when culture shifts. He wants you anchored in something eternal, and here's the grace in it all. God does the shaking before the storm does. He disrupts your false security before life completely strips it away. What feels like loss now is often protection later. What feels like subtraction is often preparation. When everything around you starts moving, it forces you to ask the right question. What actually holds me? Not what inspires you, not what motivates you, not what excites you, but what holds you when nothing else does. God is inviting you into a deeper faith. Not a faith that depends on conditions, but a faith that rests in character. A faith that says, even if this falls, God remains. A faith that doesn't panic when resources shift, because its source is secure. The unshakable life is not a life without trouble. It's a life with an unmovable center. It's knowing that even if the ground moves, you're standing on something that cannot collapse. That kind of faith doesn't come from avoiding shaking. It comes from surviving it. So let the temporary things go. Stop trying to hold together what God is allowing to fall apart. Release what was seasonal. Surrender what was limited, because every time God removes a false foundation, He is offering you a real one. When the shaking is over, what remains will not just be stronger, it will be truer, and you'll look back and realize God wasn't taking from you. He was saving you. Ladies and gentlemen, hear this with urgency and hope. The greatest mistake you can make in a season of shaking is to panic instead of participate. Panic assumes God has lost control. Participation recognizes that God is doing intentional work beneath the surface. One posture leads to fear, the other leads to formation. Too many people spend shaking seasons trying to preserve what God is trying to purge. They rebuke the discomfort, rush the process, and cling to familiar ground, even when that ground is clearly unstable. But transformation never happens in preservation mode. It happens when you yield to what God is shaping. God is not asking you to figure everything out right now. He's asking you to stay available. Shaking seasons are not about clarity. They're about surrender. When certainty disappears, trust has room to grow. And God will often remove answers so that intimacy becomes your anchor instead of information. Participation means you stop asking God to return things to the way they were and start asking Him to reveal who you're becoming. It means you stop begging for relief and start listening for instruction, because every shaking carries a lesson and every disruption contains direction. This is where maturity shows up. Immaturity says, I just want this to stop. Maturity says, God, finish what you started. Immaturity focuses on escape. Maturity focuses on endurance, and endurance is what produces depth, discernment, and spiritual authority. When you participate, you don't waste pain, you extract purpose from it. You pay attention to what's being exposed, you notice what's falling away, you discern what no longer fits. Shaking seasons reveal attachments you didn't know you had, and fears you didn't know were driving you. And God reveals them not to shame you, but to heal you. Participation also means obedience in uncertainty. You don't wait until the shaking stops to obey. You obey while things are still moving. You forgive even when the wound is fresh. You give even when resources feel tight. You pray even when emotions are unstable. That kind of obedience rewires your faith from reactive to resilient. Here's the danger of panic. Panic makes you reach for substitutes. When things start shaking, panic looks for quick fixes, unhealthy escapes, familiar patterns, even if they no longer serve you. But participation waits on God's process. even when it's slow and uncomfortable. Panic rushes, participation rests, and resting doesn't mean passivity, it means trust. It means you believe God is wise enough to lead you through what you don't understand. It means you stop trying to control outcomes and start cultivating character. Because God is far more interested in who you're becoming than how quickly you move on. Shaking seasons are invitations to partnership. God is saying, walk with me through this. Let me show you what needs to change. Let me strengthen what remains. Let me form you, not just fix you. Participation turns pressure into preparation. And when you participate, something powerful happens. Peace shows up before the problem leaves. Confidence grows before circumstances improve. Stability develops while everything else is still unstable. That's how you know God is at work. Not because the shaking stopped, but because it no longer controls you. So don't panic, don't resist, don't numb yourself, lean in, pray honestly, obey faithfully, listen carefully. Let God do the deep work, because when the shaking ends, and it will, you won't just walk out relieved, you'll walk out refined, grounded, and ready, and you'll realize that the season that once threatened to break you was actually the season that built you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me bring this home with clarity and conviction. When God finishes shaking, what remains will not be what you lost. It will be what cannot be lost. God is not interested in leaving you empty. He is committed to leaving you established. The goal of the shaking is not devastation. The goal is distinction. There is a moment after every shaking where silence settles. The dust clears, the noise fades, and what's left standing tells the truth about what was real. This is the moment God is aiming for, not to embarrass you, but to anchor you, because whatever survives the shaking is what heaven approves. Some of you are afraid of what will be left when this season is over. You're asking, what if I have less? What if my circle is smaller? What if my resources are thinner? But hear me clearly, less that is stable is better than more that is unstable. God would rather give you a little that lasts than a lot that collapses. When God removes what was false, he reveals what was faithful. When he strips away substitutes, he strengthens substance. And often what remains doesn't look impressive, but it's unshakable. It's a quiet confidence. A resilient faith, a peace that doesn't need explanation, a trust in God that no longer depends on outcomes. This is how you know the shaking worked. You stop chasing what you used to crave. You stop needing validation the way you did before. You stop panicking when things don't go as planned. You start valuing depth over display, obedience over optics, faithfulness over fame. That's not loss, that's freedom. What remains after the shaking is alignment. Your life begins to make sense again, not because everything is perfect, but because everything is ordered. Your priorities are clearer, your prayers are purer, your yes is more intentional, your no is more confident. You're no longer scattered because God has centered you, and here's the beauty of it. What remains is enough. You may not have every answer, but you have assurance. You may not have every resource, but you have provision. You may not have every relationship, but you have the right ones. Because God doesn't just remove randomly, he refines intentionally. The unshakable life is not loud, it's steady. It's not rushed, it's rooted. It's not built on hype, it's built on truth. And once you've lived through shaking, you stop being impressed by things that move easily. You look for weight, you look for fruit, you look for endurance. This is why you won't go back to who you were. That version of you needed external stability. This version of you carries internal strength. That version needed things to go right. This version trusts God even when things go wrong. When God finishes shaking, he doesn't just give you something new, he gives you himself in a deeper way, not as a concept, not as a backup plan, but as your foundation. And once God becomes your foundation, nothing else has to be. So stand in what remains, build on it, protect it, thank God for it, because what's left after the shaking is what will carry you forward. And one day you'll look back on this season, not with regret, not with bitterness, but with gratitude, because you'll see clearly that God wasn't tearing your life apart. He was making it unshakable. Ladies and gentlemen, let me leave you with this truth that settles the soul. The shaking doesn't last forever, but what God builds through it does. Seasons change, pressure lifts, circumstances stabilize, but the work God does in you during instability becomes permanent. There is a divine timeline to shaking. God never overdoes it. He never applies more pressure than necessary. He knows exactly when to start and exactly when to stop. What feels endless to you is measured by heaven, and when the shaking has accomplished its purpose, God brings rest, not as escape, but as reward. Rest after shaking is different than rest before it. Before the shaking, rest was fragile. It depended on conditions. After the shaking, rest is rooted. It flows from trust. You stop resting in things working out and start resting in God being faithful. That kind of rest cannot be disturbed. You also emerge with discernment. You can tell the difference between what looks strong and what actually is. You stop being impressed by quick success and surface-level spirituality. You recognize depth, you value consistency, you trust slow growth over sudden noise. Shaking sharpens your vision, and let's be honest, some of you are stronger now than you ever thought you could be. You've endured disappointment without losing faith. You've survived uncertainty without abandoning prayer. You've walked through confusion without walking away from God. That didn't happen by accident. Strength was forged in motion. Shaking teaches you how to stand when nothing supports you. It teaches you how to worship without music, trust without evidence, obey without applause. It strips your faith down to its essentials. And what remains is real, not borrowed, not performative, not fragile. And here's what God does next. He stabilizes what He strengthened. He establishes what He refined. He entrusts you with more, not because you have more, but because you can handle more. Stability after shaking is stewardship. God doesn't return you to the same level. You come back grounded at a higher place. You move forward with wisdom instead of urgency, with humility instead of hype. With confidence instead of control. You're no longer easily shaken because you've learned where to stand. The testimony that comes out of shaking is quiet but powerful. You don't have to announce what you've been through. Your peace says it for you. Your consistency speaks. Your resilience preaches. People will wonder how you're still standing, and the answer won't be strategy. It will be grace, and don't miss this. Your shaking wasn't just for you. What God built in you will become a refuge for others. Your stability will encourage the unstable. Your clarity will guide the confused. Your endurance will give others permission to keep going. God never wastes pain. He multiplies it into purpose. So if you're still in it, take heart. If you're just coming out of it, stay humble. And if you're standing on the other side, remain grateful. Because the God who shook you is the same God who sustained you. The shaking will stop, the ground will settle, and when it does, you'll realize something profound. You didn't just survive the season.